President George W. Bush announced the start of Operation Iraqi Freedom on 19 March 2003.
To disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
U.S.-led coalition forces had advanced over 350 kilometers into Iraq. As the Coalition Forces Land Component Command, or CFLC, had initially planned, the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force was approaching Baghdad from the southeast, and the U.S. Army's 5th Corps was approaching the city from the southwest. To maintain the high operational tempo achieved during the first 11 days of Operation Iraqi Freedom, CFLC Commander Lieutenant General David D. McKiernan directed that 5th Corps' lead element, the 3rd Infantry Division, move north quickly, avoiding the major cities along the axis of advance and ultimately fighting its way through the Karbala Gap to advance on Baghdad. The Karbala Gap, a narrow corridor of open terrain, offered the best avenue of approach to Baghdad in 5th Corps' area of operations.
The eye that we were all fixed on was Karbala, because the way the terrain is there's a big freshwater lake to the west of Karbala, and the Euphrates River is on the east of Karbala. So you have about a 5-mile gap that's called the Karbala Gap. And we thought they were going to defend that because it's a natural choke point. And so we're trying to rush up there and get there before they get set.
3rd ID developed a relatively simple scheme of maneuver. 3rd Brigade Combat Team, or BCT, would lead the attack and isolate the eastern side of Karbala. 1st BCT would follow and isolate the western portion of the city. It would then continue to objective chargers. Finally, 1st BCT would seize the Al-Qaeda Bridge across the Euphrates River. This 4-lane bridge is located about 30 kilometers southwest of Baghdad and provided the best route for the quick seizure of 2 other key objectives: Saddam International Airport, Objective Lions, and the intersection of Highways 1 and 8, Objective Saints. Each of these locations represented intermediate objectives in 5th Corps' line of operations during the first phase of Operation Iraqi Freedom. Army Doctrine Publication 5-0 explains that a line of operations is a line that defines the directional orientation of a force in time and space in relation to the enemy, and links the force with its base of operations and objectives. Lines of operations connect a series of intermediate objectives that lead to control of a geographic or force-oriented objective. Operations designed using lines of operations generally consist of a series of actions executed according to a well-defined sequence. 5th Corps' line of operations consisted of breaching the Iraqi border, securing Talil Air Base, seizing the Karbala Gap, and securing both Saddam International Airport and Objective Saints. Then 5th Corps would prepare to seize additional objectives to isolate Baghdad and overthrow Saddam Hussein's Ba'athist regime. As coalition forces prepared to attack Baghdad, the majority of Iraqi forces in 5th Corps' area of operations were deployed east of the Euphrates River. These units included the 2nd Al-Medina Armored Division, brigades from the 1st Hammurabi Armored Division, and the 6th Nebuchadnezzar Mechanized Division. The bulk of the 1st Hammurabi Division defended the area west of Baghdad, while 15 kilometers south of the city, remnants of the 6th Nebuchadnezzar and the 2nd Al-Medina Divisions held Objective Saints. Coalition forces estimated that the Special Republican Guard, operating at less than full strength, would defend Saddam International Airport and Baghdad proper. The 17th Brigade of the Hammurabi Division would relocate to defend the roads leading into the city. Planners also anticipated that up to 15,000 paramilitary fighters would participate in the city's defense. The Euphrates River was the last natural obstacle between 5th Corps and Baghdad. The Al-Qaeda Bridge over the Euphrates was required to support the forward movement of all 5th Corps ground combat and support forces.
What's really important about Peach is the bridges across the Euphrates to get you back into Baghdad are all right there just north of Karbala. If you go to the west, you're going out toward Ramadi, Fallujah, out that way. But if you go to the east, you're going back into Baghdad. So it was kind of the outer ring, that north of the Karbala Gap was kind of the outer ring of the three-ring defense of Baghdad.
Major General Buford Blunt III, commander of the 3rd ID, directed 1st BCT to secure Objective Peach and conduct a hasty gap crossing. Army Techniques Publication 3-90.4 defines a hasty gap crossing as the crossing of an inland water obstacle or other gap using the crossing means on hand or those readily available and made without pausing for elaborate preparations. A hasty gap crossing is conducted in an effort to maintain the momentum of the maneuver force by quickly massing combat power on the far side of the gap with no intentional pause. This promotes speed, facilitates surprise, and provides a continuation of maneuver momentum. On 2 April, the lead element of 1st BCT, Task Force 369, advanced to secure the bridge until 2nd BCT arrived for a forward passage of lines. Task Force 27 Infantry from 1st BCT simultaneously advanced to a crossing site 15 kilometers south of Peach, designated as Objective Hannah. This was a feint against another crossing site to draw enemy attention away from Task Force 369. 1st BCT had trained to conduct a gap crossing in Kuwait, but updated their tactics, techniques, and procedures, or TTPs, after an earlier gap crossing experience at Al-Kifl, north of Najaf, on 25 March. Reflecting on lessons learned from Al-Kifl, Lieutenant Colonel Ernest Rock Marcone, commander of Task Force 369, planned on taking Objective Peach in 2 phases. First, the task force would seize the ground on the near side of the river, suppress the enemy on the far side, and generate smoke to obscure the crossing site. Second, once the enemy was suppressed, Lieutenant Colonel Marcone intended for his remaining forces to cross the bridge and expand the bridgehead. Task Force 369 initiated movement out of Objective Chargers at 12:30. The battalion scout platoon and a tank company conducted an attack to the east and then moved north along the river, attacking enemy forces south of the bridge. By 13:10, the brigade reported that Task Force 369 had reached the southern edge of Objective Peach. Though the bridge was still standing, Iraqi forces had wired it for demolition. Within approximately 40 minutes of arrival, the scouts were in contact with what was estimated to be a battalion plus of dismounted infantry, mostly Fedayeen Saddam. Lieutenant Colonel Marcone called in fires to clear the area. The fire missions also included targets that the task force had identified as possible locations for Iraqi troops responsible for triggering the demolition of the bridge. Additionally, electronic attack assets degraded enemy command nets and hindered their ability to coordinate the defense. By integrating fires, maneuver, attack aviation, and electronic warfare, Lieutenant Colonel Marcone and Task Force 369 converged effects across multiple domains at a decisive point in the operation. Army Doctrine Publication 6-0 describes convergence as the continuous integration of capabilities from multiple domains, the electromagnetic spectrum, and the information environment to create multiple dilemmas for the enemy. By 1500, Task Force 369 had cleared the near side of the bridge. Close air support continued to engage and suppress targets on the far side of the bridge. In support of the gap crossing, 141 Field Artillery executed a fire plan that mixed high explosives and smoke to suppress the enemy and obscure their view. At 1600, Alpha Company of the 11th Engineer Battalion, under the command of Captain Daniel Hibner, as well as infantrymen from Bravo Company, 37 Infantry, were preparing to execute a daylight gap crossing. While under fire, the engineers carried 4 RB-15 inflatable boats, known as Zodiacs, several hundred meters to the river, and with the infantrymen began paddling to the far side of the bridge. To obscure the task force's actions, a platoon from the 92nd Chemical Company occupied a position northwest of the bridge on a narrow, unimproved road that resembled a levee and generated smoke. Despite their efforts, at 1615, the Iraqi defenders attempted to blow the bridge. The explosion damaged the northern lanes, but left the southern lanes partially intact, allowing for armored vehicles to cross. Concealed by smoke, The engineers cut the remaining wires and the infantry continued to secure the far side. Armor then followed. By 1700, the entirety of Task Force 369 had crossed the bridge. As 1st BCT waited for 2nd BCT to arrive, Colonel William Grimsley ordered the forces to defend the bridgehead against a potential enemy counterattack with Task Force 369 as the main effort. 1st BCT directed 37 Infantry to block the southern approaches and tie into Task Force 369's southern flank, against what was expected to be a significant counterattack to re-seize the bridge and blunt 3rd ID's momentum. To expand the bridgehead further, Task Force 369 had to control the network of roads leading to the bridge. Lieutenant Colonel Marcone identified a road intersection, approximately 5 kilometers east of the bridge, as key terrain and designated Charlie Company 369 as the bridgehead force to establish a blocking position there. According to Army Techniques Publication 3-90.4, a bridgehead force is a force that assaults across a gap to secure the enemy's side, the bridgehead, to allow the buildup and passage of a breakout force during gap crossing. The bridgehead is an area on the enemy's side of the linear obstacle that is large enough to accommodate the majority of the crossing force, has adequate terrain to permit defense of the crossing sites, provides security of crossing forces from enemy direct fire, and provides a base for continuing the attack. As part of the hasty defense, Task Force 369 analyzed the terrain and the enemy capabilities to determine their most likely course of action. Lieutenant Colonel Marcone designated a linear target along the enemy's probable avenue of approach. Additionally, they coordinated for a kill box to deconflict fires and interdict enemy forces attempting to counterattack the bridgehead. Current U.S. Army doctrine defines a kill box as a 3-dimensional permissive fire support coordination measure with an associated airspace coordination measure. Kill boxes allow attacks against surface targets without requiring further coordination between the ground force commander and the airspace control authority. Kill boxes also eliminate the need for ground observers to identify targets, coordinate with attacking aircraft, and provide terminal attack control. As long as the aircraft and munitions remain within their box, they may engage enemy forces in the target area without further coordination. There are 2 types of kill boxes differentiated by the munition delivery methods permitted in each. In a blue kill box, surface targets are engaged with air-to-surface munitions only. Any surface-to-surface or subsurface-to-surface indirect fire munitions impacting within or passing through the kill box must be coordinated with the Airspace Control Authority. In contrast, a purple kill box does not require coordination with the Airspace Control Authority. A purple kill box is used to attack surface targets with subsurface-to-surface, surface-to-surface, and air-to-surface munitions. Purple kill boxes use a coordinating altitude to facilitate cross-domain fires and maximize the potential for engaging targets. By prohibiting surface and subsurface launch munitions from breaking the coordinating altitude, and by requiring aircraft to remain above it, the commander can bring maximum fire to bear upon the enemy while preventing fratricide. These defensive preparations enabled 1st BCT to defend the bridgehead when the 10th Armored Brigade from the Al Medina Division counterattacked at 0300.
1st Brigade attacked to seize the bridge across the Euphrates River at what we called Objective Peach. We had no visibility on the defenses there other than it appeared to not be heavily defended. And then once we attacked and seized it, really no visibility on any potential counterattacks. And in fact, we probably had our largest counterattack, maybe 2nd largest counterattack occur that night.
To halt the attack, the task force fired the linear target, designated as a final protective fire, and opened the kill box, destroying 15 tanks and 30 personnel carriers across a depth of 15 kilometers. Final protective fire is an immediately available, prearranged barrier of fire designed to impede enemy movement across defensive lines or areas. By 0530, the counterattack was over. By 0900, 2nd BCT, under command of Colonel David Perkins, arrived at the bridge and began crossing the Euphrates on its way to the next key objective, Objective Saints. Elements of the Fedayeen Saddam, the Nebuchadnezzar Division, and the remainder of the Al-Medina Division held a critically important highway intersection designated as Objective Saints. 2nd BCT made initial contact with the enemy approximately 10 to 12 kilometers southwest of the interchange at 1300 hours. For the next 12.5 hours, 2nd BCT fought its way toward the intersection. During the fight, U.S. forces killed approximately 700 enemy soldiers and destroyed 33 T-72 and 2 T-62 tanks. By 0130 on 4 April, the brigade secured the objective. The first step in isolating Baghdad was complete. A 2nd BCT battled for Objective Saints. 1st BCT advanced on Saddam International Airport, located 16 kilometers west of the city. 3rd ID planned on using the airport as a base of operations for continued attacks into Baghdad. Having penetrated Iraqi defenses in the Karbala Gap and secured both Peach and Saints, Major General Blunt recognized an opportunity to sustain 3rd ID's momentum. Adjusting 5th Corps' plan, Major General Blunt decided to attack Objective Lions on 4 April instead of waiting another day. This impressive tempo was made possible by 3rd ID's application of Mission Command. Mission Command is the Army's approach to command and control that empowers subordinate decision-making and decentralized execution appropriate to the situation. Army Doctrine Publication 6-0 states, "In practice, Mission Command tends to be decentralized, informal, and flexible. By decentralizing decision-making authority, Mission Command increases tempo and improves subordinates' abilities to act quickly in fluid and chaotic situations. Armed with the commander's intent, subordinates are encouraged to seize unforeseen opportunities and exploit initial success beyond their specified tasks. To account for the chaos and unpredictability of war, and to empower subordinates to make decisions at the pace of contemporary operations, Mission Command is founded on the following 7 principles: competence, mutual trust, shared understanding, commander's intent, mission orders, disciplined initiative, and risk acceptance." With the acceleration of the timetable, Colonel Grimsley had little time to plan the attack on the airport. Nevertheless, he assessed the situation and chose to adjust the original plan by tasking Task Force 369 with breaching the airport wall from the southwest. He gave Task Force 27 the mission of establishing a blocking position at a major intersection on Highway 8, known as the Four Corners. The BCT's 3rd Battalion, Task Force 37, would follow, exploit the breach at the airport, and then begin clearing operations on the west side. 1st BCT advanced shortly after 1500 on 3 April. By 1735, the brigade's direct support artillery battalion, reinforced by 3rd ID's artillery MLRS, had initiated preparatory fires onto the airport from a highway interchange approximately 3 kilometers to the southwest. From the interchange, Task Force 369 approached the airport in 2 columns. After a slow and deliberate advance, the western column breached the wall at 2300. For the remainder of the night, the task force attacked through the breach. Initially, enemy resistance was light, but it would take 1st BCT, now reinforced with 2 battalions from 3rd BCT and the 101st Airborne, another 2 days to clear Saddam International Airport. Task Force 27, ordered to establish a blocking position northeast of the airport, had been fighting for 3 consecutive days and had moved throughout the night to reach its position. After traversing over difficult terrain, the lead elements of the task force finally arrived at approximately 0500 on 4 April. By 0730, all elements were at their battle positions at the Four Corners. Initially, the area around the interchange was quiet, but around 10:30, a Fox Chemical reconnaissance vehicle was fired upon by a T-72 tank. When additional T-72s engaged the task force, it quickly became evident that the tanks were part of a larger counterattack supported by Iraqi mortar fire. A second and more dangerous counterattack soon developed. Approximately 100 Special Republican Guard troops hit the battalion, penetrating deeply into the defense and coming perilously close to Task Force 27's command post and forward aid station. Sergeant First Class Paul Smith, platoon sergeant in Bravo Company, 11th Engineers, attached to Bravo Company 27 Infantry, played a critical role in defending the airport from the counterattack. A veteran of Operation Desert Storm, Sergeant First Class Smith used a .50 caliber machine gun on an armored personnel carrier to defeat the attack and seal off a vulnerable point in Task Force 27's hasty defense. Sergeant First Class Smith enabled the company's first sergeant to organize a counterattack that ultimately stopped the enemy. During the fight, Sergeant First Class Smith was mortally wounded. His courageous actions saved the lives of other U.S. soldiers, for which he received the Medal of Honor. Over the next several hours, 1st BCT fought off Special Republican Guard and paramilitary forces and prevented any further threats to the U.S. position.
The coalition had seized the international airport west of Baghdad, formerly known as Saddam International Airport. The airport now has a new name, Baghdad International Airport, and it is the gateway to the future Iraq.
With the airport secured, 3rd ID was one step closer to isolating Baghdad. The original plan called for 5th Corps and 1st MEF to surround the city. From these positions, the soldiers and Marines could conduct raids into Baghdad to collect intelligence, seize critical targets, destroy Iraqi forces, and eventually clear the city.
Bottom line is we're defending the airport from the movement coming into Baghdad, and I'm searching and attacking up the road. The best defense is the best offense. We're continuing combat operations.
With both Objective Saints and Lions secured, other elements from 3rd ID advanced to their objectives around the city. On 3 April, as 1st BCT secured Lions, 37 Cav, the division's cavalry squadron, moved to the intersection of Highways 1 and 10, Objective Montgomery, to guard the division's northwestern flank. Once in position, Lieutenant Colonel Terry Farrell ordered his troops to establish checkpoints and a hasty defense. Although 37 Cav initially reported minimal enemy activity, attacks steadily increased throughout the morning. Over a few hours, 37 Cav destroyed Iraqis, attacking in buses and pickups, as well as T-72s and BMPs. 37 Cav had successfully stopped a counterattack by the 15th Mechanized Brigade from the Hammurabi Division and protected the division's flank. North of Baghdad, 3rd BCT advanced to secure intersections, an Iraqi airfield, and bridges over the Tigris River, designated Objective Titans. Securing Titans proved central to 5th Corps' plan to isolate Baghdad and set conditions for further American attacks into the city. By 6 April, units from 3rd ID were in their designated positions, ready to attack Saddam Hussein's capital. Despite these advantageous positions, the intelligence on Baghdad's defenses remained incomplete. Based on equipment and vehicles abandoned along the march north, intelligence analysts concluded that between 9 to 12 companies of Republican Guard had withdrawn into the city to aid in its defense. Analysts also expected that the Special Republican Guard would defend Saddam Hussein's palaces and administrative offices. The Fedayeen's strength and disposition were also unknown, but based on its past performance, it would likely mount a fierce defense. Striving to improve their situational understanding before beginning operations, Lieutenant General Wallace and Major General Blunt consulted drone and satellite imagery of the city. These technologies indicated that there had been almost no defensive preparations within the city, leaving 3rd ID unclear as to whether Baghdad was a cleverly disguised trap or an abandoned city. Though the fight for Saddam International Airport had been stiff, there were no clear indications of how difficult the fight for Baghdad would be. Major General Blunt believed in maintaining constant pressure on the regime, as his command had done during the drive to Baghdad. To do so, and in an effort to ascertain the status and disposition of the enemy, he ordered 2nd BCT to conduct a reconnaissance in force into the city. A reconnaissance in force is a deliberate combat operation designed to discover or test the enemy's strength, dispositions, and reactions, or to obtain other information. A commander assigns a reconnaissance in force when an enemy is operating within an area and the commander cannot obtain adequate intelligence by any other means. That night, Colonel Perkins began to plan a reconnaissance in force into the city. This would become known as the Thunder Run. Beginning at Objective Saints, 2nd BCT was to advance north for 20 kilometers and then proceed west to end at the airport. Colonel Perkins chose Task Force 164 Armor, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Rick Schwartz, to lead the column of almost 100 tracked vehicles. Even with the impressive firepower from 29 tanks, 14 Bradleys, and a number of armored personnel carriers, nerves were on edge when the task force crossed the line of departure at 0630 on 5 April for the first American incursion into Baghdad.
M1 tanks move very, very fast, okay? And they can take a huge hit. They can take a hit and keep on rolling. So actually, what leading by M1 tanks, I am going to leverage their strength is they can take a big hit, they can put out a huge amount of firepower, and they can go fast, okay? And so that's the leverage I'm going to use for the M1 tanks is their shock effect, firepower, speed, and protection.
Within minutes of the advance, the task force began taking RPG and small arms fire from plainclothes Fedayeen and uniformed Special Republican Guard forces. As they moved north, the intensity of the resistance increased, particularly at overpasses with on and off ramps that provided cover for the defenders. The Iraqis had clearly prepared a defense of the city by lining both sides of the highway with weapons caches and bunkers. 2nd BCT had expected defensive efforts of this type. What they did not expect was to see civilian motorists trying to use the same freeway they were using to advance. They later determined that the city's civilian population was unaware of the coalition forces' proximity to the capital. Radio broadcast by Iraq's Minister of Information, Mohammad Saeed al-Sahaf, or as the Americans called him, Baghdad Bob, led the citizens of Baghdad to believe that the American forces had been repulsed. As the Fedayeen attempted to stop the column's advance, it became extremely difficult for the American soldiers to determine if civilian vehicles were hostile. Against a hail of RPGs, machine gun, and small arms fire, the armored column rolled forward without much interruption. That is, until a 1 in a million shot from a recoilless rifle pierced the vulnerable rear engine grille of an Abrams tank and started an engine fire. Lieutenant Colonel Schwartz temporarily halted the column and allowed the crew time to try to extinguish the fire, not wanting to leave a disabled tank on Highway 8 for the enemy to exploit for propaganda purposes.
What was happening, at least what I think was happening, is the turbine engine burned so hot and the fuel cell had been pierced. Diesel is a fairly stable substance, so it's not going to like flash like a gasoline fire. It's a slow burn. But I think what was happening between the water that was being poured in the fire and the diesel that was going in, as it kept rising, it kept hitting that hot engine, and so it just spontaneously combusted, and we'd get a flash fire. So you'd think it was out, we were working on the vehicle, and all of a sudden flash. I mean, at one point, I turned around, and I don't know if I was getting another water can, but when I turned back this way, all of a sudden the fire flashed up and hit me in the face. And it was funny, because afterwards, when the division commander met us at the airport, he looked at me and he reached up and he went like this on my face, and he went like that to me. He said, "Your eyebrows are gone."
Since the fire could not be extinguished due to fuel leaking onto the hot engine, it was a futile 20-minute-long effort. Frustrated, Colonel Perkins ordered the column to move on and leave the tank behind. The task force soon approached the final overpass before the entrance to the airport. They could see that the Iraqis had prepared for the column by placing cement highway barriers across the freeway and digging in around the overpass supports. Enemy fighters were also in position on the overpass to fire down on the column as it passed beneath them. Fitted with a 7-ton plow, the lead tank, commanded by First Lieutenant Bobby Ball, accelerated and rammed into a point where 2 dividers met. About a foot of each barrier broke off, and the Abrams surged up and over the barricade, landing on the other side. And the column simply rolled unhindered onto the tarmac of Baghdad International Airport. The Thunder Run of 5 April strongly indicated that Saddam Hussein's forces could be expected to defend Baghdad energetically, but that their defense would be disorganized and largely ineffective. Regardless of the Thunder Run's initial success, the Iraqi government released a televised interview with Mohammad Saeed al-Sahaf, who claimed that the city's defenders had defeated the invading American forces.
Is in full control of Saddam International Airport.
That night, Major General Blunt and Lieutenant General Wallace formulated a plan to disprove Iraqi propaganda by attacking into Baghdad proper.
Hey, we want you to sort of conduct a raid into Baghdad, similar to the airport, again, to discern the defenses and find out what's going on.
The Thunder Run on 5 April was an unqualified tactical success, but it was not without cost.
We had 1 killed in action, 5 wounded in action. We had lost 1 tank, and we had 1 Bradley that was hit pretty severely. We had another vehicle that had a pretty significant fire on it. Equipment on the bustle rack had caught on fire. So we came back with, I think, a little bit more seriousness. And then when we got the order to go back in on the 7th, and this time it'd be with the entire brigade, the 6th was like this massive maintenance day, and you've never seen people more focused on getting their stuff fixed.
The soldier killed in action during the first Thunder Run was Staff Sergeant Stevan Booker, tank commander in Alpha Company. When both the coaxial and the .50 caliber machine guns malfunctioned, Staff Sergeant Booker, with total disregard to his personal safety, exposed himself to engage the enemy with his personal weapon. He continued to engage the enemy until he was mortally wounded. For his extraordinary heroism, Staff Sergeant Booker was posthumously awarded the Silver Star. 16 years later, on 5 April 2019, the U.S. Army upgraded his award to the Distinguished Service Cross. After holding a memorial service on 6 April 2003, Task Force 164 prepared to go back into Baghdad the next day for the second Thunder Run. This time, however, they had the entire 2nd BCT with them. As they planned the second Thunder Run into the city, both Major General Blunt and Colonel Perkins acknowledged that success depended on flexible decision-making by the commander on the ground. With the intelligence gathered during his first reconnaissance in force, Colonel Perkins took disciplined initiative and began planning to exploit the potential success of his second Thunder Run by establishing a downtown base of operations. Colonel Perkins believed it would be easier to defend a position in downtown than to repeatedly run the gauntlet in and out of the city.
Well, the airport, you can do it in a circular route. You can attack sort of from the southeast, go up and leave it, and come back and go out to the west and south and back in. So you can't, it's kind of like a circle. Baghdad, you can't do that to, because you go up the highway and then you take a turn to the east and then you're in. And then now you have the river, the Tigris River. So there is no, you can't just come out the back end of it. If you're going to go in, you're going to have to come back out the same way you went in.
The objectives were located in open terrain, consisting of broad boulevards, gardens, and parks, with very few buildings that could conceal enemy positions. The tank battalions would be able to set up defensible positions with open fields of fire in all directions. This position would not only demonstrate Saddam Hussein's inability to defend his own capital, which stood in contrast to the Iraqi media's narrative of the event, but also serve as a tactical stronghold for the tank battalions. In turn, the mission would achieve both informational and operational objectives. In developing the plan for the second Thunder Run, Colonel Perkins identified 4 necessary conditions for 2nd BCT to remain downtown. First, the brigade must fight its way into Baghdad without being fixed by the enemy. Second, seize defensible, important, and symbolic terrain within the city center. Third, establish and maintain a line of communication into and out of Baghdad. Fourth, resupply must be sufficient for the task force to remain overnight. Colonel Perkins briefed a scheme of maneuver for the brigade that supported Major General Blunt's intent and accounted for his follow-on conditions for remaining downtown. The Thunder Run would be a brigade-level operation led by Colonel Perkins himself. With Task Force 164 and Task Force 464 in the lead, 2nd BCT would proceed to the vicinity of Objective Saints, then move north into Baghdad. The main objectives were 3 large highway interchanges that were designated as Objectives Curly, Larry, and Mo. Upon reaching Objective Mo, Colonel Perkins would decide whether the conditions were such that he could take his brigade into the heart of the regime.
So he said, what we're going to do is take the 2 tank battalions, and they are going to go screaming into downtown Baghdad. Okay? Do not stop for anything. If you're going on the bridge abutments, you're going to take a lot of fire and everything like that. Button up, go in, keep going, don't stop. If a tank is disabled, immediately abandon the tank. Immediately abandon it. Put the crew on something else and keep moving. Do not stop.
To help clear the way, 1st Battalion, 9th Field Artillery, the brigade's direct support artillery battalion, would conduct preparatory fire on each objective 10 minutes before the task force arrived to eliminate as much resistance as possible. Late in the evening of 6 April, a patrol from 2nd BCT identified an obstacle to the planned scheme of maneuver. While reconnoitering for a potential staging area for the resupply package that would support the next day's operations, Major Sean Mullen, the Brigade S4, located a minefield approximately 1 kilometer north of Objective Saints. The minefield was situated on 2nd BCT's planned avenue of approach. After some discussion about what would be the most expedient way to clear the route, the decision was made to conduct a covert breach. According to Army Techniques publication 3-90.4, the covert breach is the creation of lanes through minefields or other obstacles that is planned and intended to be executed without detection by an adversary. Its primary purpose is to reduce obstacles in an undetected fashion to facilitate the passage of maneuver forces. A covert breach is conducted when surprise is necessary or desirable, and when limited visibility and terrain present the opportunity to reduce enemy obstacles without being seen. A covert breaching is characterized by using stealth to reduce obstacles, with support and assault forces executing their mission only if reduction is detected. Through surprise, the commander conceals their capabilities and intentions and creates the opportunity to position support and assault forces to strike the enemy while unaware or unprepared. When they arrived at the breach site, Captain Daniel Hibner and the soldiers of Alpha Company, 11th Engineer Battalion, were surprised to find that the Iraqis had not bothered to bury the mines. In a truly absurd twist, the Iraqis had merely piled dirt on top of the mines and placed them on the asphalt road. Beginning their work at 0346, the engineers had successfully cleared and marked the route by 0455. At 0538, 2nd BCT began moving through the breach on their way to Baghdad. The armored column almost immediately started taking fire. 11 minutes into the run, 2 RPGs hit the back end of one of the tanks and disabled it. Leaving the tank to be towed to the rear, Colonel Perkins restarted the column north through the city. The movement up Highway 8 evolved into an intense, slow-rolling firefight as tank and Bradley crews engaged improvised fighting vehicles and dismounted Iraqi combatants attempting to close in on the column. As the task force moved from objective to objective, Colonel Perkins closely monitored the situation. On reaching Objective Mo, Colonel Perkins concluded that his brigade could indeed capture the center of the city, known as Objective Diane. According to Army Doctrine Publication 6-0, decentralized execution is the delegation of decision-making authority to subordinates, so they may make and implement decisions and adjust their assigned tasks in fluid and rapidly changing situations. Decentralized execution is essential to seizing, retaining, and exploiting the initiative. The commander's intent provides guidance within which individuals may exercise initiative to accomplish the desired end state. Understanding the commander's intent 2 echelons up further enhances unity of effort while providing the basis for decentralized decision-making. Colonel Perkinson's competence instilled trust in his superiors, and his ability to exercise disciplined initiative was founded on a shared understanding of the commander's intent. Colonel Perkins ordered the lead task force to turn toward Objective Diane. After a relatively short drive, the lead elements of Task Force 164 passed under the swords of Qadisiyah and arrived in the Kirk district of central Baghdad. Setting up a series of blocking positions around the government complex, the task force soon became engaged in numerous firefights with counterattacking Iraqi soldiers and Fedayeen militia fighters. Meanwhile, on Highway 8, Task Force 464 made initial contact with the enemy at 0636. Facing a similar, if slightly less intense fight than 164, it made the turn at objective Mo at 0700 and reached its downtown objectives at 0720. To command and control the operation, 2nd BCT established its main command post, or main CP, at Objective Saints, only 6 kilometers from Objective Curly. This placement allowed for continuous communication and served as a resupply base for the mission. Unfortunately, around 1000, a short-range rocket destroyed the BCT's main CP. Fortunately, Colonel Perkins and the brigade staff reacted quickly. He rapidly transferred full control of the operation to his Tactical Command Post, or TAC, co-located with him at the city's center. Designed to enable flexible command and control, battalions and above are manned and equipped to field both a main command post and a tactical command post. The main command post is a facility containing the majority of the staff designed to control current operations, conduct detailed analysis, and plan future operations. It is larger, has more staff members, and is less mobile than the tactical command post. According to current U.S. Army doctrine, a tactical command post is a facility containing a tailored portion of a unit headquarters designed to control portions of an operation for a limited time. The TAC is fully mobile and includes only essential soldiers and equipment. The TAC relies on the main CP for planning, detailed analysis, and coordination. Multiple command posts allow a commander to synchronize and control simultaneous operations among numerous subordinate units, particularly during complex tasks such as gap crossings, passage of lines, or air assaults. Multiple command posts are also used to maintain command and control when the headquarters must displace geographically to keep pace with the changing battlefield. When a commander decides to displace the main CP, the TAC can assume responsibility for controlling operations and coordinating across subordinate, adjacent, and higher units while the main is offline. Similarly, when 2nd BCT's main CP was struck by indirect fire, the TAC was able to rapidly assume control and maintain the brigade's momentum. Back at the main CP, under the leadership of the brigade executive officer, Lieutenant Colonel Eric Wesley, the staff quickly established a casualty collection point, moved intact vehicles away from the flames, and prepared to rebuild the main CP. The main CP was reconstituted and back in operation in less than an hour. The attack resulted in the death of 3 soldiers and 2 reporters. 15 soldiers were wounded. The attack on 2nd BCT's main CP illustrates the challenge that commanders face in balancing effectiveness against survivability when organizing their command posts.
One of those movement pieces.
To enhance survivability, command posts need to remain small and highly mobile, especially at lower echelons. Command posts are easily acquired and targeted when they are concentrated. Considerations for command post survivability include dispersion, size, redundancy, mobility, electronic and thermal signatures, camouflage, and concealment. By positioning his TAC forward during the 2nd Thunder run, Colonel Perkins dispersed his command posts and ensured a redundant command and control element was available in the event of a contingency. Now that the main CP was operational and his units were in position, Colonel Perkins faced the decision of whether he could keep his brigade downtown overnight. To make his decision, Colonel Perkins considered the status of each of the units involved in the fight. Task Force 315, fighting along Highway 8, had not yet secured the brigade's line of communication, and 2nd BCT was in need of fuel and ammunition resupply. With the tanks consuming almost a gallon a minute, and calculating that the 500-gallon tanks would be empty on idle in less than 7 hours, Colonel Perkins ordered the task forces to turn off their engines for the next 2 hours and only start them to charge their batteries. He reasoned that delaying his decision would give Task Force 315 a little more time to secure the supply route. However, Task Force 315 was experiencing desperate battles at all 3 objectives. Task Force 315 defended Objective Curly with an ad hoc company team of 1 infantry platoon and a mortar platoon. The enemy consisted mainly of foreign fighters from Syria. Although they were not particularly well trained, the Syrians were determined and numerous. Even after receiving reinforcements from 2 mechanized infantry platoons, the U.S. soldiers were barely holding. It was not until an additional company team from Objective Saints moved forward to reinforce Curly that the soldiers were able to get the situation firmly under control. The fighting at Objective Mo was even more intense. For 8 hours, the infantry fought a sustained firefight, in the process destroying 60 Iraqi vehicles and killing at least 200 Iraqi soldiers. By the end of the fight, the company was low on fuel and had fired twice the amount of its basic load of ammunition. As ammunition and fuel stocks dwindled, Colonel Perkins made the decision to order Task Force 315's commander, Lieutenant Colonel Stephen Twitty, to send the supply convoy north as quickly as possible to resupply his force. Field Manual 3-96 explains that when a unit has an urgent need for resupply that cannot wait for a routine logistics package, an immediate resupply may involve classes 3, 5, and 8. In this situation, a maneuver battalion might use its forward support company located in the combat trains to conduct the resupply. Lieutenant Colonel Twitty immediately sent his supply convoy forward from its location at Saints. Soon, the light-skinned resupply convoy raced toward Curly through a gauntlet of small arms and RPG fire, where it stopped to rearm and refuel the defenders, losing 2 fuel tankers and 3 ammunition trucks in the process. It then raced on. Lieutenant Colonel Twitty ordered the convoy commander to bypass Larry and proceed to Mo. After resupplying the forces at Mo, the convoy moved on to supply the task force elements at Diane. With that effort, Colonel Perkins determined that the brigade had met his 4 criteria, allowing 2nd BCT to remain in central Baghdad. That night, 2nd BCT defeated a fierce but uncoordinated counterattack across the Tigris River. The next day, 1st MEF entered Baghdad from the east. On 9 April, Marines and soldiers linked up in downtown Baghdad.
Historical day, I think, here in downtown Baghdad. 3rd Infantry Division, U.S. Army, and coalition forces to be here.
With the isolation of the city complete, the Ba'athist regime disintegrated as its leaders fled the capital. Follow-on clearing operations caused further demoralization of the Republican Guard and Special Republican Guard soldiers, who melted into the populace and returned to their homes. 3rd ID's successful seizure of downtown Baghdad in April 2003 essentially signaled the end of Saddam Hussein's Ba'athist regime. Coalition forces would soon shift their focus to the campaign to stabilize Iraq.
Dolphin will switch over to a control boat, which is our work boat, the boat that we work out of, that we go into the minefield. essentially what happens on a training day is he'll go out, detect the mines, he'll come up and tells me he sees them, then we'll mark the mines and we'll have divers go down